Eric. Eric is a partner at Google Ventures and an investor in Warp. And Michelle, an early engineer at Warp and now the growth lead for Warp. I will hand it over to Eric to take it away.
All right. Let's see. Can you hear me? All right. I'm going to have a LaCroix. I was just told that these things, if you drink more than like 5 of these a day, that it's potentially bad for you. So this is probably like number 6 for me. So let's see. Let's see if I make it through the panel. Delighted to be here with all of you. As I mentioned, I'm a partner at GV. I would maybe like to start with, we got a little quick intro, but maybe just how you found your way into the startup world. Like not everyone, I don't think anyone is like a 6-year-old kid and is like, oh, I want to, I want to have a startup. Maybe some of us, not me. How did you find your way into the startup world?
Yeah, and for me, I just somehow found myself working and interning at smaller and smaller companies over time. So I started at Facebook, and then I went over to Slack when it was 1,200 people, Robinhood when it was 300, joined another company when it was 30, and then the next step is I joined a 2-person company, and that eventually grew to 35, and it's Warp. And every time I went to a smaller company, I got more agency, more autonomy. I got to see how like different functions worked, and it was just a lot clearer like how the product that I'm working on ends up going out to the customers. And I really enjoyed seeing that through line from what I was working on to the customer.
How many people here have tried to work? Wow, that's pretty good. So maybe the ones who haven't yourself, can you tell us a little bit about what Warp is and what you're doing?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so Warp is a command line terminal for developers. It's modern, it's collaborative, and there's AI built into it. It helps developers get more efficient and productive at delivering software. So like, you know how in VS Code, there's syntax highlighting, completions, you can actually move your cursor with your mouse. Imagine if you can do all of that in your terminal. That's Warp. And on top of that, we also chunk your command and outputs together into units. So it's easier for you to navigate through your history. It's no longer a big wall of text. And with AI, we can help you generate bash commands in your terminal without you having to leave your terminal at all. So that's Warp.
I love the description of like you can actually select and move text in the terminal, and that's like revolutionary in the space. And but that's the lowest part, and there's a lot more to go. If you're thinking about joining an existing startup, what are the things that you were looking for? What were the things that you absolutely wanted to see that you didn't want to see in the companies or the startup companies before you joined?
Yeah, for me, what really helped was like identifying like the one thing that I really wanted to see, and then interviewing companies to find whether they had that one thing. And for me, it was finding a good manager. And so every startup CEO I met, I was asking them questions about how they thought about management. Eventually, when I got the offer for Warp, I actually they asked me for references, and then I asked him, the founder, for his references on like people he's managed before. And talking to those 3 references really helped me solidify that this person was a really good manager. And on top of that, they also gave me tips on how I can work with him. So why don't you do it? And like I always hear the saying that like you leave managers, you don't leave companies. And so I really like took that to heart and made sure that that was the thing that I optimized for. In a startup, you cannot change teams. That is that one team that you have to be in. In a bigger company, you can always request to transfer to a team if you don't like your manager. So that's what I did, and I really I'm glad I did it.
That's awesome. I didn't realize you asked Zach for references. So that's a really good that's a good technique. I want to shift a little bit to design. I would say Warp, Notion, and Cron. I mean, these are all very design forward companies. We were actually just chatting right before we came on here. So my firm, GV, we actually have a bunch of UI and UX designers on staff, and we actually see it as a real value to provide, advice on how to improve your design, how to improve your UXR, as an investor. Like, we see that as being an incredible advantage. So you've all worked at these sort of design-focused companies. I'd be curious, just like, what are the design philosophies you think are paramount to being successful? Because these are things that will kind of define how your users interact with you, how you build product for the next several years. I'm just curious how you think about a design philosophy.
Yeah, speaking of performance, like speed is definitely like one of the top design and product principles at Warp. Like, people are using a productivity tool. They don't want to be slowed down by anything. So speed is one design principle. The second thing we have is everything has to work out of the box. With the old terminal, you often have to spend like a few days configuring your terminal till it actually looks good. But with Warp, like, you get all of that out of the box, and it works with all of your previous shells. And like, it's really hard to build that experience, but that's the number one thing we think about whenever we design any new feature. Like, how can we make it so that the user doesn't have to do a single thing to use the terminal? And then the last thing I would say is, like, we want to make sure that we're keeping the power of what the old app was. Like, we have to make sure that we are in feature parity with the other tool that people are switching away from. And that might sound like, oh, isn't it obvious? But actually influences like every single design and product decision at Warp, in that even though we have like this really beautiful, aesthetically pleasing app already, we are dedicating, like, for most of the past 3 years, like more than half of our engineering team to like matching item 2. And it's so important to get it right. Like both of you mentioned, details really matter. And like, Raphael, you're still like replicating like Google Calendar. That is so important, because if you want someone to switch away from their old tool, you need to match what they have and then be 20 times better. So that's how we think about it.
It's a really good point. And I think, once you've designed what you think is the perfect, or at least near perfect product, then you get into the challenge of growing it, right? And so that gets into another discipline that's around kind of product engineering, growth engineering. How do you build virality into your product and match with the calendar or Notion? There's sharing. Would love to hear how you all think about, embedding growth into the products you're building.
Yeah, so given that I work in growth, so the number one rule of growth is retention. You can model on your spreadsheet and see, like, just moving like your retention by 1% could mean like double or like triple the growth in the future, because you don't want to keep like adding users to leaky buckets. So the number one rule for adding growth to your app is making your app very highly retentive. So that's number one. And then I guess, and like that would then lead to virality too, because your NPS score will go high. So that's like, how likely would you recommend Warp to a colleague or a friend, right? If your retention is high, your NPS is high, you have like organic word of mouth. And then when you get that, you can then start adding like the normal like virality growth stuff, like make sure everything in the app is shareable, make sure it's really easy to share a link of everything that you have, like make sure that when you share it, it like unfurls so that other people could see it organically, etc.
Great. I mean, I think what I took away from that is, like, you have to make something people love, and you have to make sure they love it right away. So easy stuff. So it's 2023. We're about a year into our ChatGPT moment. Be curious on your thoughts on AI and how that's coming into each of your products.
Yeah, and AI is all over the terminal of Warp. So it's spacebar for Notion, but it's hashtag for Warp. So in your input area, type hashtag, and you can start typing English or any kind of natural language. Like, how do I undo that Git commit? How do I grab with case insensitive? How do I search a regex in the file and output it to another file? You type that in, and we will generate a command for you, and you can run it directly in the terminal. If you have any errors in your output, you can right click and it will explain the errors and actually give you commands to run to solve it. You can there's also a chat interface where you can tell it like, how do I do this really complex database migration? And it will give you all of the steps to do it. The power is that you are staying in your terminal the whole time, and you're getting highly tailored commands based on the context that you're already in.
It's good. We use it every day. Well, great. I think maybe should we open up for some audience questions if we have any?
Yeah, I think it's a really big problem for terminals where people are used to their key bindings. I think that the solution is in onboarding, and it's in helping people with all these different muscle memories, like pick what is like their like usual key mapping, pick what is their like usual like visual appearance, and then go from there. And you have to always keep building to support the muscle memory, because that's, yeah, you need to convince those people to move over.
Okay. Why don't we give it up for the panel?